Hello everybody, welcome to another One Sky Astrology video. I'm Michael, and this video is going to take a deep dive into, well, matter, mind, and mystery. This being the three planes of hermetic alchemy, hermeticism, the physical plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. We're going to look at deep fractality. We're going to look at a way of interpreting planets that functions fractally across these planes. What the hell am I talking about? Good question. Let's start there. This is going to be somewhat different from a Western mainstream approach. I'm a person who is profoundly distrustful of mainstream and institutional systems, views, values, narratives, etc. So I always take a syncretic approach to what I'm doing. I pull from different sources, and astrology in the West is a very questionable art, science, what have you, craft, call it what you want, but European history is not like Vedic Indo-Himalayan history. European history suffered a dark ages. Rome and its influence crumbled, fell. A lot has been lost. There are a lot of holes here. So when I look at astrology, I'm not afraid to try on different things, pulling from Indo-Himalayan astrology, for example. Newer systems like evolutionary astrology. The work of other critical thinkers like Dane Rudyard, and I was introduced to astrology by Christine Gans Conrad, who had a very holistic approach based on the possibility of freedom, awakening in the middle of all this. And these are bits and pieces that I've put together. Now, why would I think that I have the insight to cobble together a system of astrology that's even worth presenting? Because I'm always looking for holistic systems, and the metric of this holistic system is, does it exhibit deep fractality? So let's look at that. That is going to tell you why I feel this information is worth sharing and why it works so well for me. Fractality is a self-similarity across scales. And I want to give an example here with this illustration. This is a fern, and you can see if we take the scale of the whole, we have a shape. We have an unfurling spiral flanked by little side protrusions in the form of leaves. Now, if we take the scale down one and we look at the parts, or we look at the leaves, we see an unfurling spiral with little side protrusions flanking it. This is one example of fractality. Self-same, self-similar patterns across scale. So if you have a zoom and you zoom in or you zoom out, you're going to see the same pattern exhibited. Okay, well, that is not super hard to understand. That fern, we're just looking at its physical structure. So within the realm of the physical plane, we have fractality, structural fractality. When I say deep fractality, what I mean is taking the planes of the Hermetic tradition, taking the planes of Hermetic alchemy, we have the mental plane, the physical plane, and the spiritual plane. These are the three planes that comprise any phenomenon, all of reality. Anything that exists is going to exist across these three planes. These are the three planes of existence. And break that down a little. When we talk about the mental plane, we're talking about the inner landscape of psyche. We're talking about mental, emotional phenomena. So, sure, it's easy to see that there's a self-same pattern between planes of the mental, the inner world of the psyche, and the outer world of the physical. The actual planets, the actual stars, the living skies reflect the psyche. This is the basis of the science of astrology. My main rub with Western practice is that it gets very vague and kind of glosses or omits any information that has to do with the spiritual plane. Western culture is not what I would describe as profoundly spiritual, not when compared to Indo-Himalayan culture, for example. And I'm not trying to make a case that their culture is better. I'm not even going to go there. What I'm saying is that when I see astrology practiced, I don't always see deep fractality, which is self-similarity across all planes of existence, a system that works, that correlates on every level, a system that fires on every cylinder. When I see a lot of Western practice, what I notice is that they take this basis of sun, moon, ascendant, this little snapshot of the conscious mind, the ego self, and the direction it's heading. And they look at that and they say, oh, here's your sun. This is your expression, how you express ego, how you express personality. This is your moon. This is how your inner process, your inner hidden self, or in some cases, your soul, this is how that is. And the ascendant, this is the mask. This is the persona that it wears. This is the role that it plays as it moves through life. And this is basically ego astrology. This is basically glorified horoscope astrology. If you have a Libra sun, you're going to like long walks on the beach and French pastries and, yada, yada, yada. And the problem here is not that it doesn't work, because it works. This is information that you can find within the field of the horoscope, within the field of the radix, the natal chart. No problem. It's there. It works. It's helpful to a lot of people. It answers the question, what is the potential of my personality? What is the potential of my life journey? How can I express myself to the fullest and, find my way through the obstacles, maximize the opportunities and blessings. And it's all functioning on the level of just this conscious self-expression, sun, moon, ascendant. All the other information is kind of ornamental to this fundamental ego construct, this fundamental sense of self, conscious mind, and so on. There's a lot more potential to astrology. This thing goes way deeper into spiritual science, deeper into, for example, the journey of the soul through lifetimes. The relationship of that soul to the ego, the conscious mind. The relationship of that soul to spirit, broadly, this thing that pervades, permeates, and saturates all levels of existence. This is an entire plane in the hermetic alchemical model Alchemy being a process of inner growth, change. And in order to really apply the alchemy of the spiritual aspect of this science, how am I able to awaken? What are the potentials for my soul to integrate with the ego? What lessons does that soul bring from previous lifetimes with a different ego experience? These deep questions are in everyone's chart. So when I present this model, this kind of model that exhibits deep fractality, I want to say it is a system. I'm not trying to brand it. I'm not hawking deep fractal astrology, whatever, y'all. That would be a lot of people's approach. This is a work in progress. It's reached a point of stability that I feel like presenting. It works very, very well for me in order that I can provide meaningful benefit to others. If that interests you, if you want to learn to read charts and interpret planets in context in a deeper way, deeper than the mainstream narrative, deeper than the institutional narratives that are out there, most all of them, to be honest, deep enough to talk about the potential for achieving things like, absorption into higher states of consciousness, awakening, different kinds of awakenings. There's not just one liberation awakening. This is a graduated path. There are various awakenings along the way. If you want to understand the patterns that the soul brings into this lifetime from past lifetimes and how to integrate those energies through the expression of the conscious mind, the ego, and how to resolve those patterns so that future expressions of ego on the soul's, the immortal journey of the soul, all that information is available. So this isn't something I invented out of thin air. A lot of this comes from looking at Tibetan sources, looking at Vedic sources, interpretations, just their wisdom traditions and their astrological science, and applying it to this Western expression of the art of astrology, sort of filling in some of the blanks. Why? Because Indo-Himalayan culture never went through a dark ages. They have a vast oral tradition stemming back to profound shamanic knowledge, ancient science that is unbroken in its lineage and heritage. And because of the pedigree that represents, there's great value there. Some of this comes from the insights of evolutionary astrology, which was discovered, was revealed via dreams, via Swami Sri Yukteswar, who wrote the Sacred Science. And an example of that unbroken Vedic knowledge is that in that Sacred Science, he says you can't understand precession, you can't understand the sun's journey and the movement of the heavens relative to life on earth unless you take the sun as a dual star. This is oral history. The ancient peoples knew that the sun and Sirius were in binary orbit. Precession has been thoroughly debunked, never been proven. It's just a shoddy hypothesis. Isaac Newton was great, but he missed that one. evolutionary astrology was revealed through Swami Sri Yukteswar's dream appearance to Geoffrey Wolfe Green. In 1977, the year I was born, Pluto conjoined North Node, new expressions of the soul, new expressions of deep science. So I resonate with this deeply. Geoffrey Wolfe Green presented a lot of material about outer planets and their relationship to inner planets, the lunar nodes. I've incorporated a lot of that into what I'm presenting here, into the system that I use to interpret charts, planets, all of this. Some of this material comes from the insights of Dane Rudyard, whom I adore, another critical thinker who challenged institutional narratives, deconstructed, mainstream views, and built on what was left, what worked in profound and meaningful ways. His work can be found at the Chaldea archives, and can't say enough about Dane Rudyard's insight into the holistic properties, qualities, relationships within astrology. Some of this insight comes from my first astrological teacher, Christine Gans-Conrad, who is the headmistress of the School of Archetypical Astrology in Brussels, Belgium. She had a holistic model. So I have always been, like I said, challenging mainstream narratives, deconstructing institutional points of view, and seeking to establish for myself holistic models. Again, just so we're on the same page with what I want to present here, the metric for my model is, does it exhibit deep fractality? Is it self-similar across planes of existence? Not just within a plane at scale, that's fractality, like we saw in the fern, that's the physical fractality, but across mental, physical, spiritual. Do we see concordance? Do we see synchronization? Is this thing really describing actual reality, firing on all cylinders? That's the metric. And out of that urge, that desire to discover whether that truth exists, I have developed ideas. These are ideas that I want to present to you today. So, without further ado, let's jump in. This is going to be a series of videos. So in this first video, I'm just going to present more or less planetary interpretation. What I want to focus on today is not so much the information that's out there in mainstream circles, the kind of common knowledge, Mercury, thought, communication, movement. Yeah, we're not going to go over that much. I am going to have a lot to say about the sun, the moon, the relationship between Jupiter and Saturn, the structure of ego, the outer planets and their relationship to the inner planets. This is going to be a series of videos. So in this first video, I'm going to take a look at the breakdown, the foundation. I'm going to lay out a model, a map. In the second video, we're going to start to apply the principles from the first video, and specifically, I want to look at the relationship between pairs. Elementally speaking, there are elemental pairs of there are bodies that resonate with the element of space, akasha, bodies that resonate with the element of air, fire, water, and earth. The way these bodies relate to each other is well, profound, and we're going to look at this in terms of octave theory and elemental resonance. That'll be the second video. In the third video, I'm going to look at correlations between the 6 visible planets and the Sun, and the energy system, the architecture of the human energy system in terms of chakras, and in terms of the expression, the journey of Kundalini in that architecture. This is the journey towards liberation. This is the journey towards awakening, spiritual wholeness, fulfillment, etc. And chakras and Kundalini are not specifically confined to Vedic thought. They pop up everywhere. But again, that'll be the third video. So, without further ado, let's jump in to this system. Here is where we are starting. As it is above, so it is below. As it is below, so it is above. To accomplish the miracle of only one thing. Now, this is the opening line of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, a quote attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the great sage, the thrice born. Thrice born refers to the journey of Kundalini awakening. We are born once from our physical mother's womb into the world. We're born twice when we reawaken the dormant, so to speak, Kundali in our system, and we're born a third time when that Kundali makes its journey, makes its upward journey, and clears out all of the obstacles, the karmic obstacles, to clear insight and vision to the fulfillment of the potential within us for spiritual awakening. And when we resolve the Kundalini journey and reach a point of stability and awakenment on that level, we're said to be thrice born. That is the profound meaning of the caduceus. This is the pineal gland, the hemispheres of the brain, and the central yogic channel, the central energetic channel, and the two serpents are indicative of the lower chakras. So we have pineal symbolizing the consciousness, Ajna chakra, and we have the lower 6 chakras symbolized by the points at which the serpent crosses. All of this is, like I said, encoded, hidden in the hermetic tradition. It's encoded and hidden in every tradition of true depth, of meaningful agency when it comes to awakenment. Why? Because this is reality. This is the way the human body works on the level of its spiritual architecture. To accomplish the miracle of only one thing. So across the planes of physical, the planets themselves, mental, the inner landscape of the psyche, and spiritual, the energetic, the electromagnetic, whatever that is, whatever that life force, that spiritual animating force is within us, all these levels are one thing. Again, I reinforce this idea because that is the metric, and I want you to see that I'm not drawing on sources randomly or syncretically. I'm not drawing on Vedic sources when it suits me. Oh, chakras, sure, there are 7 chakras, 7 planets. Isn't that coincidental? No, it is not. So, looking at the planets themselves, what we're going to see is that if we start with the sun, the mainstream narrative here around sun, what's commonly said about sun, is the sun is our radiance, sun is the core of our personality, sun is our expression, sun is where we shine, sun is where we get personal power, sun is our basic orientation. Sun is masculine to moon's feminine. What else do we say about sun? Well, all of that is true and applies. So I want to acknowledge that, I want to support that, and I want to build on that with a crucial idea. And like I said, this ego astrology is like, it's a hammer. It's a hammer. And if you only have a hammer, well, the world is nails. And this culture is profoundly ego-based. Astrology as a science. A lot of ego here. There's going to be resistance to this on an ego basis. No problem. I expect it. I invite it. But when we look at the sun is a master key. The sun is the master key to the self on every level. The sun is 99% of the mass in the solar system. So right away, we can see that this is a core element. This is the element which is holding everything together. As a master key, the sun represents our orientation to, our angle of approach to, and our expression of consciousness, awareness itself. That doesn't seem radical at first glance, but what I want to say is that consciousness and awareness are not something that exists in the middle of your head like a little homunculus looking out like, oh, I'm aware. Consciousness and awareness are a field that pervade everything. Consciousness and awareness are the matrix, the construct in which this whole quantum experience arises, which is why, upon close examination, reality is revealed to be 99.129, empty space, void, shunyata. This nonsense, illusion of solid physicality is understood by the mystical traditions as mental. It's the first hermetic axiom. Everything is mind. All is mental. The Buddha, Shakyamuni, said that reality wasn't something that existed. It wasn't something that did not exist. But it was vividly unreal, illusory, and it manifested in a dream-like way. Now, in a dream, everything is very, very conscious. In waking life, everything, the world is alive. Everything is an expression of consciousness. And the sun in the solar system, the sun in a natal chart, and the sun in our psyche is that regulator that takes vast flows of energy at unimaginable, voltage, wattage, magnitude, these plasma flows that would just scorch us to ashes, and it brings them down. It regulates and contains, radiates it as light, as heat. It nourishes us. This is why in Tibetan astrology, sun is feminine. It's the mother. It's the breast that we suckle. It's the source of life, the source of nourishment, energy. And the sun in my system here, the sun in a deeply holographic, a deeply fractal way, is associated not with self, but not with ego self, as much as it is a conduit between the ego self, represented by the moon, and the self with a big S, the great self. The moon is our ego self. It's like the drop, and the sun is like the ocean. The sun is very important to understand as consciousness awareness, because when we have that insight, we can start to approach our journey through life in a totally different way. I'm going to open a chart. This is a blank. So I want to set something up that I find very interesting. In holistic astrology, as taught by my original teacher, who I mentioned, the journey around the wheel is actually a journey to the center of the wheel. This is exactly why the labyrinth is such a sacred symbol. What its mystical meaning is we're journeying to the core, the center of the wheel. So when we take that and we apply it to the radix, the natal chart, what we're looking at, let's say we have Sun anywhere, 8th house Aries, no problem. We'll start here. 8th house Aries. If you're looking at the sun from the point of view of, oh, the sun is my sense of self. The sun is, I'm an 8th house Aries, so I'm very driven. I'm very Martian, very motivated to transform, to undergo metamorphosis. 8th house of the self, Aries. I'm very blunt. Aries, when it comes to the expression, sun of hidden truth. I seek hidden truth in a very motivated way. Hidden truth, 8th house, motivation, Aries, etc. And we develop these ideas and we fix them. We see very broadly across Western paradigms and Vedic paradigms, we see fate, destiny, determinism take the day. Now, one of the qualities of consciousness awareness is freedom. As we develop familiarity with consciousness, as we develop and strengthen our awareness through the life journey, through the journey around the wheel, we're making a spiral toward the middle of the wheel. We're walking the labyrinth. From the middle of the wheel, we can choose broadly. We have agency, freedom. Consciousness is possessed of svatantra, divine independence. Consciousness is the ace. The ace. Consciousness is the joker in the deck, and all of the planets, all of the signs, all of the houses, all of the archetypes of astrology are under consciousness hierarchically. Now the sun as our avenue toward, our angle of approach toward, and our expression of consciousness, this is the very reason that the sun is a source of personal power. This is very important to understand, that we can walk to the middle of the labyrinth and we are not fixed. As we exhibit consciousness, explore consciousness, strengthen consciousness by experience, by the spiritual journey, by the life journey, to the degree that we become aware of being aware. And you don't need to take that out ad infinitum. You just need to be aware of being aware. One meta level, all you need. This is a powerful provider of what? Sovereignty, freedom. So right away, we're seeing a concordance between the physical of this star, the mental of our psychic experience of the urge towards sovereignty and freedom, and the spiritual journey towards the divine agency, swatantriya, of awareness, inherent in awareness consciousness. So from the point of view of the center of the labyrinth, once I'm here, I'm dataless. I can fly. I can, when it's appropriate, choose to manifest and act out of 11th house Cancer consciousness. I can choose a different zodiac. I could do, 5th house Virgo and consciousness. Whenever I need to apply the self, the person, the personal expression, the expression of my personhood in a way that exhibits the curiosity of Gemini, as opposed to the sort of, driven, focused steamroller of Aries. Instead, being open, broadly curious, interested, processing things in an informational way, no problem. We become unstuck, unfixed. This is freedom. I want to be really clear here that free will does not negate, it does not obfuscate or circumvent deterministic model like fate, destiny. It functions in the same breath, in the same paradigm. We will always exist in a world that is bigger than us. We'll always exist in a limited way within time, and within that limitation of cause and effect, we will always have karmic circumstances. There's no getting around those. But free will is a universal truth. It's just not the only player on the field. So within the circumstances that we're presented, how much agency, how much freedom do we have? This is a function of our exploration, our exercise of solar energy, awareness, consciousness, the conduit between great consciousness, the big mind of Zen, the big S self of Advaita, Shiva Tantra, what have you, all kinds of Vedic philosophy, and the small s self. The sun is that conduit. This is why moon always reflects sun. Sun, big S self, great self, is the source and origin of small s self. All right. I think that is a little glimpse into some of the power of the sun and why it is the core, the stable core of our experience. Always that journey around the wheel. This is the hero's journey. This is the alchemist's journey. We journey around to return home to find out that we always possessed great treasure. What is the treasure that we always possessed, that we never didn't have? Consciousness, the basis of our being, the field in which everything that you're aware of, everything that exists, is existing in a field of awareness. Even this screen you're watching me on, if it didn't exist in a field of awareness, how would you, as a conscious, aware being, connect with it? You are aware of it. It is existent in awareness. It is not anywhere else. This is the profound agency, the profound personal power that is held within consciousness. We experience the world and create the world at the same time. And just like that model in the movie Inception, we can interrupt. We can get right in the middle of that process and take power to ourselves. This is solar power. So, get solar powered. Get on board with this. This is a model that is long been occulted in the West. This is a model that is deeply fractal with spiritual truth. And this is a model I encourage you to explore in your own natal chart and adopt in your journey through life. The more you lean into your natal sun, the more you express your natal sun, the more you become familiar with a source of great personal power, sovereignty, and transcendental agency. The sun is, in the West, Christ. In our sidereal mythology, the 12 signs, the 12 disciples, were the journey through the zodiac, and the solar force, Horus, Krishna, Christ, and so on, was God, was the same as God. Consciousness is the same as God. What is looking out from behind your eyes is the same as is looking out from behind my eyes. This is why the Mayans said, I am another yourself. In Lakesh, that was their aloha, hello and goodbye. They acknowledged this. This pervades everything. Consciousness is a field, and we exist within that field, and our inner sun is that regulator which brings that field of consciousness into personal, core expression around which our experience orients itself and organizes itself. When we get in touch with inner sun as a source of power, we begin to have the power to create our reality. I can't go on about this enough. Deeply, deeply consider this. This is why Christ could, do miraculous things. And like he said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the Fool and the World in tarot. And yes, I know the 19th tarot major arcana is the sun, but that's the sun in its individual expression. The symbolic expression of consciousness, awareness, spirit, this thing, is the Fool, and in its completed sense, the world. When we start the hero's journey, we are the Fool. We make the Fool's journey, we return back home to realize, oh my God, I am the world. I am. That I am. The Alpha and the Omega. Get with this. This is very hard to topple. This is very hard to topple. You may disagree out of institutional thinking or conditioning or just critical analysis, wanting to play devil's advocate. I always encourage that, but this is the sun. This is the sun astrologically. And the treasure that we have never not possessed is awareness. When we started the journey, we were perceivers, possessed of awareness. We had to go in a way, a spiral way. We had to accumulate life experience, getting familiar with the power and agency of awareness in order to return back to the point of origin as sovereign, as possessed of the agency, as stronger. We had to work that muscle. All right, I'm going to leave the sun there and move on. We're going to look at Mercury. So Mercury is, I actually don't have a lot to say about Mercury. I can pretty much see eye to eye with the consensus kind of thought on Mercury. Mercury is representative of thought, left brain, logical, linear thought. Mercury is motion. Mercury is communication. Mercury is the way we receive information, organize information and disseminate information. So Mercury is very mental. If the sun is the force of Akasha and organizes itself around the construct of space consciousness, Mercury reflects the element of air. In the mental correlation, in its motion, it also, Dane Rudhyar made this observation, it is like electricity. If the sun is light as a force, Mercury is electric. And there are a couple profound applications of that. I'll leave those to you to discover. I don't want to go on about every little insight in this video. I will say Venus is magnetic. And I don't have a lot to add about Venus either. Venus, the conventional, the institutional, the mainstream wisdom on Venus is perfectly applicable due to its magnetic qualities. Venus is relationship. Venus is our sense of appreciation. Venus is our valuables and our values. This is second house. Second house. Valuables, outwardly, our stuff. Inwardly, our core of what makes us appreciate the world. The basis of our appreciation is our sense of values. These are the things I appreciate. These are the things I don't. Venus represents all this, and Venus represents beauty, well composed, phi ratio, fractality, geometric balance, symmetry, that which we find attractive. Venus is the element of water. Venus is the element of water. So Mercury is air, and Venus is water. We have the sun as space, Akasha, the wisdom of consciousness, the construct. Yeah, let's leave that there. Like I said, no need to reinvent the wheel. Earth-Moon is interesting. Earth-Moon is interesting. The Earth is the stage. It's the elements in balance, and it's a sort of fractal level of this whole thing. It's if you look at a human being and then you zoom out and you see the Earth, you see the same elements in expression. You see a lot of similarities between the Earth and human. You see a lot of similarities between the Earth as a balanced elemental system and the solar system as a whole. There's not a lot of astrologers who really read the Earth. Some people, they'll read topographic versus like geographic natal chart. And if you don't know what that means, there's no problem there. If you do know what it means, it's almost a negligible point. It's a little bit of a difference. The interesting philosophical point there is you can substitute the center of the Earth for the location of the person. So close is the relationship. So the Earth is the stage. The Earth is the stage, the living planet that we are supported by. And interestingly, what becomes very relevant from an astrological point of view is the moon. I'm going to have a lot to say on the moon, so I'm going to try and summarize my thoughts here. More than any other planet, the moon is the ego self. Now, in conventional wisdom, sun is very much ego self. Some people, some astrologers I really appreciate say moon is soul. Niche niche. No, moon is conscious mind. Moon is very conscious experience. Yeah, it's inward. Yes, it's a little more hidden. Not always on display, but nonetheless. The moon is the reflector of the great self, and it's the small. reflector. It is that which brings great consciousness, the oceanic consciousness of the big mind, into its expression as it moves around the spiral, the wheel, the zodiac, the labyrinth, into personal expression. The moon is the ego. It is that which changes. It changes very quickly. It moves most rapidly of any celestial body that we ascribe meaning to astrologically. And for that reason, you can easily draw this correlation that on the soul's journey, the soul being Pluto, we'll look at that later. Pluto, very slow moving. The moon, very fast moving. The moon is the individual self, everything about you that changes. The moon is everything about me that has my parents, my hair color, my features, my height, my weight, all of this, everything that I give back to the earth when I die is the moon. Ego, self, personhood, all of it. Yes, it's emotional experience. Yes, to some extent, it is right brain. Brain has correlations with all 6 planets. There's 6 mansions of the brain. There are, like I said, 6 chakras, 6 expressions of a long vagus nerve. We're not going to get into that until the 3rd video. What I want to say is moon is not soul. Pluto is soul. Pluto is the immortal. Pluto is that which survives death and rebirth, the phoenix. Pluto is that which really faces no consequences, unlike the ego, which bears the weight of our karmic burden. This is one of the reasons for Pluto's long shadow. Pluto has a terrible side because Pluto exists well outside of consequence. The moon is that which is constantly dealing with consequence. The moon is the ego we adopted to experience this life. The moon is the expression that the soul chose to take to learn the lessons that it needed to learn in this lifetime. Moon is a pair with sun, not always masculine, feminine in orientation. Both sun and moon are resonant with the element of Akasha, space. Both sun and moon are at their highest expression, gender fluid, gender neutral, androgynous. Why? Because consciousness is not gendered. As a sun-moon pair, within this patriarchal sort of masculine social paradigm of the last 6,000 years, you can say that men have written a story that sun is masculine. Moon's feminine. Like I said, in Tibet, sun is feminine. Sun is the nurturer, the core of the family unit. Moon is the masculine. It moves around, it changes, the roving eye. You can see there is a philosophical correlation here. Ultimately, when we're working with consciousness, we're working with this sun-moon pair. We're working with this resonant pair in the element of space, and the great work inwardly is to perform the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine. If you're a person whose natal chart reflects, let's see. If you're a person whose natal chart reflects great femininity, say you have 12th house Virgo sun, you have, let's say 4th house Sagittarius moon, you have Virgo on the ascendant, Pisces on the descendant. This core orientation is going to express itself in very feminine terms. Let's say even Mars in Taurus, or even better yet, Mars in Cancer. In 10th house, here, even the masculine side of the ego, the personal sense of self, is expressing in very feminine terms. Even if you are a person here who is, born male, presents male, assigned male at birth, your experience of consciousness, sun, moon, is going to be feminine. Now, some people will want to change the physical to correlate to their mental experience. Some people will want to change their mental experience to correlate to their physical. It's a matter of personal choice, and there's really no right or wrong here. This dance of finding personal balance and personal ease of expression has been going on for time out of mind. Transgendered people, two-spirit people, this is not a new thing. There's nothing new under the sun, folks. But what matters here, this is very interesting, is that the great work of personal freedom is accomplished by the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine. So if you have a very feminine expression of consciousness, it doesn't matter what sex you are, what they called you at birth, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you find your inner masculine so that you can perform the sacred marriage. When you perform sacred marriage, you birth sacred child. Sacred child is a reclamation of your inner child, the consciousness before differentiation, before the Kundalini split into Shiva Shakti. We'll look at that in the third video. Consciousness before it became caught up in language, thought forms, dualistic personal narratives, Vikalpa in Sanskrit. Let's move on to Mars. Mars, again, a lot of the conventional wisdom applies here. Our personal urges, our desires, what drives us, motivates us. Mars is resonant with the element of fire, and as such, it gets destructive when it's not controlled. It has a very aggressive side. It will burn you. Unchecked or out of balance, it's quite a force to be reckoned with. So, it is what motivates us, drives us. It is the ego urge, the personal desire. It is the desire nature. Venus rules romance. Mars rules carnal expression, lust, the sexual style. Venus gets sexualized, but Venus is more about that interpersonal dynamic, that romantic dynamic. Mars rules sex. Mars expresses as libido, and Mars is that inner fire of life force, profoundly connected with Kundali, with personal power. And again, resonant with the element of fire. I'm going to leave Mars there because I don't have a lot to add that is radically different on the topic of Mars. But here's Jupiter and Saturn. And I want to say that most people say that these 5 planets, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Moon, and Mars, are the basic ego construct. Most people in Western astrology will tell you Jupiter and Saturn are kind of intermediary planets. They're not really expressing as ego components. I disagree strongly. Jupiter and Saturn are ego components. Now, they're the outer perimeter of ego. So when you have Jupiter and Saturn, first of all, they are the boundary setter, the delimiter. Saturn is the outer boundary, the keeper of that threshold. And Saturn is setting limitations. So you can look at the flow of energy in this model of planets that have to do with ego expression as centrifugal. It's coming through from the great source of spirit, consciousness, what have you, regulated by the sun, dispersed as light, organized gravitationally. And when we get to Saturn, Saturn draws a hard boundary. Saturn is the delimiter, and it says, no, I am the periphery. If the sun is the central core of our sense of self, Saturn is what creates limitation, limits, boundaries, the delimiter of our sense of self. Saturn gets a bad rap as a devil, but Saturn is actually that force which creates healthy space. Without Saturn, we can't have the boundaries and create a sense of space in which we can heal, grow, perform this alchemy. Saturn is like the crucible in which all of this profound and sacred inner alchemy happens. Saturn is very important as part of the ego. And if you throw it out, if you say, no, Saturn's just obstacles, Saturn's just limitations, Saturn's just a bunch of stuff that happens to us, Saturn is just sickness, Saturn is, outside of the self, exerting influence in an inward way on the planets, it does have an effect of causing all of that. Obstacle, restriction, limitation. It's the adversary. It's where we get the root, Satan. Doesn't matter. Saturn functions resonant with the element of Earth, and so does Jupiter. Saturn and Jupiter are brothers, and if Saturn is the outer limit of the personal sense of self, conscious experience of ego, Jupiter is that force which is always seeking fellowship, which is always looking to expand. Saturn is expansion, and Jupiter as the gatekeeper functions as a contracting force. Because they're resonant elementally, we have to marry the two if we want to experience the potential of this earth element to its fullest. We have to get Jupiter, the force of Jupiter and the force of Saturn, talking to each other. And to take this on, I mean, you might say, oh, I've never seen Jupiter associated with element Earth. You might say, how could Jupiter and Saturn be brothers? Saturn is a Titan and Jupiter is a god. You can say a lot of stuff. You can say whatever you want. But in the expression of the psyche and in the expression of the energetic architecture of the inner world, spiritual world, Jupiter is functioning as our connection to the outer world, that which is pushing, always seeking to go beyond the limits of Saturn. It's always expanding. Saturn is always contracting. It's always looking for opportunity through socio-sexual means. This is reflected by its flirtatious and to some degree licentious nature in Greek mythology. The point here is you have a lot of balance here between the force of expansion and its expression as hope, fellowship, blessings, that sort of thing, and Saturn's force of contraction. Contraction, its expression as fears, as isolation, as obstacles, yes, but by marrying them, here's another sacred marriage we have to accomplish. We can find the balance between our independence, Saturn, the hermit, our sense of independent self, created by personal boundaries, and our sense of interdependence, our connection to society, our connection to others, our ability to encompass that which transcends our own boundaries. We have to look past our own nose, and it's Jupiter that's the constant outgoing force that's always pushing to break, well, let's say bend the rules. To bend the rules that Saturn creates. That is the fundamental dynamic of interrelationship that I perceive between Jupiter and Saturn. And together, because they are resonant with Earth element and having so much to do with the structure of our lives, our psyches, they rule temporal power. And when you get Jupiter and Saturn conjoined in transit, you have dynamic shift in the structure of temporal power, banking power, social structure, political power. All of this is known to hinge on the cycles of the Great Conjunction. So they symbolize the force of the outer boundary of ego. Jupiter is the urge to transcend and grow, and Saturn creates limiting structures. So they both seek sovereignty in their own way, but neither of them will find it without the other, without that balance. They're both limited. Jupiter always goes too far, and Saturn is always just too reserved. There needs to be a balance, a marriage. They need to get talking to each other in a friendly way, in a sacred way. So the ego, the self-experience, our personhood, our sense of I am, it stops here. There is the limit. Up to this point, Saturn, again, we're experiencing a flow of energy from our core, the sun, which is centrifugal. It is moving outward. Saturn functions as the superego, that sense of order and control that allows us to work within our more chaotic urges, work with and within. Not to say sun is the chaotic urge. The chaotic urge exists on almost every level. Saturn is a nice pair with superego, but I don't know where I'm going with this because I don't put a lot of stock in Sigmund Freud. I'm more of a young guy. Let's just leave that there. Let's say that in the third video, we're going to look at the relationships between these 7 forces, the 6 planets, and the sun, the relationship between those and the chakras, and how this relates to the Kundalini journey. In the second video, we're going to look at the elemental associations. Again, Mercury, air, Venus, water, Moon, space, Sun, space, Mars, fire, and here we have Jupiter and Saturn as the Earth twins. Now, Sun and Moon are resonant, and Jupiter and Saturn are resonant. So within the construct of self, ego, personhood, this conscious experience that we have, there are 2 sacred marriages, two marriages to perform. Sun and Moon, and then the big gay Earth twins. Don't take me too seriously, folks. But nonetheless, we're going to move on to the outer planets. And when we get to the outer planets, you'll see Uranus, Neptune, Pluto exert centripetal force. Centripetal force, they exert force from outside. These are emissaries, messengers of the spirit, the big mind. These exert force contrary to the ego. And this is why they all have such radically disruptive effects when they come into contact, especially harsh contact with the inner planets. Nonetheless, we're going to explore some elemental resonance, and we're going to explore octave theory. And octave theory is the idea that Mercury and Uranus are both resonant with element of air. Neptune and Venus are both resonant with element water, and Pluto and Mars are both resonant with element of fire. This has profound meaning and application, which we'll explore in the second video of this series. For now, I want to look at a system in which Uranus, which is often given this kind of modifying force. It comes through, it changes, it's explosive, it's eccentric. All of the common mainstream knowledge about Uranus works. It works for me. Again, no need to reinvent the wheel, but I do want to add, Uranus is the deep mind. Uranus is the ancestral mind. When Uranus and Mercury are in contact, relationship, we'll get into the nuance of their relationship as expressions of air, mentality. You have access to past life knowledge, deep Akashic intuition, universal kind of thought consciousness. So Uranus is the cosmic mind. It's the subconscious mind. It's mind beyond ego. Strange knowledge, past life stuff, like I said. And it's why it's conventionally understood as change and our higher self, our true self. Because really, on a certain level, our true self transcends and contains our ego expression. Uranus isn't really directly our higher self per se, but it, like Neptune and Pluto, it represents a higher octave of our personal self. It's erratic, it's unpredictable, it's unconventional, and it's also the spearhead of this centripetal assault. So you have this real dichotomy here. You have, this real oppositional force between Saturn and Uranus. Saturn is the limiter of centrifugal force. Uranus is the spearhead of the oceanic force of greater consciousness and spirit, which is like the ocean. When the drop of individual self comes into contact with the ocean, it breaks its surface tension. I mean, not just the drop in the ocean is broken down. The ocean will break down anything to its constituent parts. And Uranus is, again, that spearhead. This is where it happens. Uranus has incredible disruptive force. It causes anxiety on a personal level because it is challenging ego to expand. It causes crisis, causes upheaval. Usually a blessing in disguise because it's taking us toward our potential. It's moving us in the direction of expansion. One of the reasons Jupiter and Uranus work so well together. In contact, very benefic. And it's one of the reasons I consider Uranus a benefic. It's one of the reasons I consider Uranus a blessing planet, in spite of its propensity to disrupt whatever's going on. Let's look at Neptune. With Neptune, we have this kind of sense of universal water. So if Venus is personal water, ego water, then Neptune is the waters of the spirit. With Venus, we have personal appreciation and our sense of what we like. With Neptune, we have the possibility of agape, universal love. Neptune is the spirit. Neptune is an emissary of oneness, of spirit, of consciousness, but from outside. So where Sun modifies this force and makes it life-giving, light, warmth, nourishing energies and radiations, Neptune, it functions differently. It's like an emissary. And Neptune is an emissary of the spirit. It's unhinged, it's unbound, it's not operating by the same rules as any ego planet, as any planet that has to do with personal selfhood. Neptune as an emissary comes knocking, and it's got a profoundly and insidious malefic side. It's where we have escapism, it's where we have addiction, it's where we have confusion, it's where we have delusion, the ability to delude ourselves. All of this is really when Neptune's poorly aspected, when it's out of balance. When you have Neptune exalted or in harmonious aspect, you have the expression of very high spiritual principles like forgiveness. You have principles like, very pacific expressions of spiritual truth. So Neptune is the emissary of the spirit. You could say Pisces is the stars that express the energies of the spirit, a kind of conduit as a constellation, much like the sun regulates this thing from our core. Pisces is a conduit, a regulator for spirit, but again, from the boundaries, from without. And the 12th house is the area, the territory of the spirit. None of those things are the spirit itself. The spirit, like consciousness, like awareness, pervades absolutely everything. Neptune becomes very important when it comes to awakening the heart and rising above our lower urges on the spiritual journey. This is going to be part of the third video. But Neptune is the ocean. If all of this is the drop, all of this is the drop, Neptune, Pisces, 12th house, all of this is the oceanic force of spirit, and it's very resonant with the sun, but very different, very, very different. Neptune gives access to incomparable wisdom, profound inspiration, depth of insight, and it also completely destroys the ego. It's the matrix or the basis within which the soul moves, and it's really not resonant with the individual self except through great adaptation and alchemy, usually involving some degree of stress and crisis. A spiritual awakening rarely looks like Om. It usually looks like breakdown, profound wrestling with sanity at its outer edges, often spiraling out of control, only to realize that the whole experience was designed, like a Uranian experience, to expand our threshold, to move us outward into greater territory. One of the reasons that Neptune works well with Jupiter, and Jupiter is resonant with Pisces. They both are expansive and expanding forces. Where Jupiter is positively benefic, Neptune has an insidious shadow, a long shadow. Because it's such a powerful force, it's got a long shadow. And so does Pluto, which I mentioned earlier in this video. And here we are with Pluto. We're about to wrap this up, so let's get to it. Pluto is resonant with Mars, in that Mars is the inner urge, the inner desire, the inner motivation in a personal way. Pluto, transpersonal. representing the urge of the soul. Why did the soul choose to adopt this ego? What is the soul doing here? Pluto is the unconscious. It's the individual soul, not the moon. And it is the desire urge that we have on the level of us that is immortal, immutable. It will survive death. It is reflective in the physical plane of what in the mental and spiritual plane is our indestructible side. So Pluto is operating entirely outside of the consequences of our ego self. And for this reason, it has a long shadow. Those of you who are familiar with Pluto know that it acts as a terrible force, ruling crime, ruling abuse, ruling manipulation, ruling secrecy, ruling societies that manipulate in secret. It's a very powerful urge. It deepens and intensifies. And its effect, when it comes into contact with inner planets, is one of metamorphosis. Metamorphosis through dichotomous expression. Pluto is actually a dual planet. Pluto has a moon and they orbit each other. Now the Earth has a moon that orbits the Earth. Pluto has a moon and the center of gravity is actually in between them. It's Pluto Charon. For this reason, Pluto Charon is a profoundly paradoxical force. And this takes a lot of manifestations. Pluto is known to make no sense, to be pulled to two extremes at once. And the soul, just to take for example, has an urge to individuate, to experience itself as an individual ego lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. It has its own urges, it has its own drives. The soul has its own momentum, motivation, arc of trajectory. We need to get on board with this. It is a very important point in anyone's birth chart. Pluto also has an urge to rejoin the source. It seeks death. It's a lord of death. It was Hades. Pluto was Hades. Charon was an underworld deity. So while at the same time it seeks life, it also seeks death. While it rules death, it also rules rebirth. And what we end up experiencing, what the ground level experience of Pluto is metamorphosis, transformation. This becomes important when we find Pluto and Mars in contact with each other. When we have difficulty there, we have the ego urge running kind of disharmonious to the soul urge. And this is when we see Mars express as abuse of power, violent, forceful, aggressive, frustrated. When you can get the individual urge subsumed, when it can die to Pluto and be reborn in harmonious expression, this is literally a spiritual awakening. This is the surrender of the personal agenda to the deep and profound agenda of the soul. We're going to look at all manner of awakenings within the context of Octave Theory in the next video. There will be part 2, the applied science of what I've just laid down here. And we'll look more in depth at the science of awakenment, applications, implications, and elemental resonance, especially between inner planets and outer planets. And again, just to wrap this up in part 3, we'll examine the relationship between the 7 inner planets, Sun to Saturn, and the chakras of the subtle architecture of the human body and the journey of the Kundalini through the human system in the human life. The astrological forces that reflect and affect, to a great degree, that journey, some of the signatures of various different kinds of awakenings. All right, I think that's it. I'm going to leave this here, my friends. I invite any feedback you have on this. I ask that you hold it, you consider it. Don't just push back because this isn't conventional. Don't be one of those conformists who only has room for institutional narratives. If you hadn't noticed, the institutions have a propensity for lying through their shiny teeth. Consider this, hold it, see if it works for you, try it on for size. Again, my metric is this resonant, harmonious, and concordant? Does it exhibit fractality across planes of existence, broadly, the physical, the planets themselves, the mental, the inner world of psyche, the spiritual, on the energetic journey towards spiritual wholeness, freedom, sovereignty? Does this check? Does it track? All right, my friends. As always, thank you for watching. Goodbye.